There's so much that goes through any student's mind as they get ready for their VCE English exam. And it's always important for English teachers like me to remember that you have all those other subjects that you're getting ready for as well. So today's video is about cutting through everything else. I'm going to be short, sharp, and direct, and I'm going to talk to you about the essential content that you must be including when it comes to Section A, Section B, and Section C. Now, this video isn't for one particular type of student, it's for everyone, because everyone needs to remember this from time to time. There will be certain students that aren't having much success with these tasks that really need to be reminded of this, but there are also some students that will need to be reminded of it because they need to get away from all of their retelling of the story or whatever it might be, or all of this descriptive language, and just get to the point. So what we're going to do, we're going to run through the exam section by section, and I'm going to talk to you about with each of the assessments what it is that is expected of you and how you can go about being direct and making sure that you're engaging in what is truly going to be assessed. Now, I'll say right off the top that, of course, with all of these things, I'm going to be talking to you about the essentials and the foundations. And I want to be clear in saying that just by doing these doesn't mean that you're going to get yourself a 10 out of 10. Your ability to think and the quality of your thinking, the insightfulness that you can show, your understanding of these texts or of the Section C material, the level to which you can show that level of insight and understanding, of course, is going to dictate how far you are rewarded with all of these things, just like your level of expression and your ability to write clearly will have an impact on how far those things go. However, they are the decoration that exists on top of the foundation that we are going to talk about today. And if you don't have that foundation in place, it doesn't matter how great your writing is or how much knowledge you have of any of the texts that you've studied. If you aren't getting involved in this essential information, then you're really not getting yourself to where you need to be. And so we're going to start with Section A. And one of the main things that I see when I'm marking practice exams for students, when I'm helping students out in certain classes, is students not engaging with what the question is asking. And it got to the point so much that I created a separate video just for that. Check that one out after you've seen today's video. 6 ways of going about different questions that I'll ask you in the exam, and that'll help you out there. But the one thing I want to ask you today is to make sure that you have evidence throughout your paragraphs and throughout your entire essay that shows me that you are responding to the question that has been asked. Sometimes the students can do this in a way where they respond to the question with their topic sentence and they have that linking sentence at the end of their paragraph, but what's in between doesn't match up. Some of you might need to include what I call a milestone sentence, a sentence, midway through your paragraph that shows the assessor that, yep, I'm engaging with this question and I'm really providing a response to it. One way that you can check this for yourself, read the essay question, then read the first 2 sentences and the last 2 sentences of each of your paragraphs, and be really brutally honest with yourself and ask, am I responding to this question? Are my paragraphs moving to a point where I'm coming to an ultimate response to what this question is asking? It can be a real eye-opener and something that you might realize you haven't been doing. On top of that, we also need to talk about what and how. Essentially, and remember today I'm talking about that foundation knowledge of what all of our writing and our paragraphs and our essays are based upon. Essentially with Section A, you need to be able to show me an understanding of what the writer is saying. And if you look through the expected qualities document, you'll see things such as values and ideas, author's message, and all those types of terms being used. And that all comes down to what the author is saying. And so a really good check with this is to see how many times you're bringing up the author's surname. Now, let's be careful with that. We can't just shoehorn the author's surname into every 3rd sentence and just hope that it's doing the right job. But if we are being effective in the way in which we are often coming back to the author or the director or the poet or whoever it might be, or the different things that you're studying, because they're not all novels, making sure that we've got those names in there and that we're coming back to their messages and their ideas, and that is the focus of our essay. Not talking about the text as if the assessor hasn't read it, not talking about the text in a way where you're retelling the story, making sure that you are talking about what the creator of the text was trying to get across through their creation of that text. The values, the big ideas, and the messages needs to be the focus of it. On top of that, we also need to have how. the text is being put together. So if it's a film, you need to be able to show understanding of film techniques and decisions made by the director. If it's a novel, you need to be able to talk about the structure of the novel and symbolism and the things done by the author that have helped them get that idea across. And so, of course, again, this is where we should see lots of sentences that include the author's surname. And you'll notice here that the two main elements of what I'm telling you are the essential content for section A are making sure that, first of all, we've answered the question, and we're doing that throughout. But throughout our paragraphs, our focus is on what is the writer saying to us, what are the messages, the ideas and the values, and how have they got those ideas across to us based on what they have done, and can we show a knowledge of that? Far too often, students think that having a good knowledge of the text is just knowing what happens or showing me that you understand that you've read the book. It is not about that. It's about so much more. And if we don't get to those points, we're robbing ourselves of those higher marks that might be achievable for us. Section B, and to be perfectly honest with you, this is probably the main reason that I created this video, because of the amount of Section B pieces that I've been reading in an area of study that's called reading and comparing. And so many of these pieces of work don't actually get to any comparison. It's so important that you have sentences within your paragraphs, that you have paragraphs that are there within your essay that are focused on comparing the texts. And we need to be honest with ourselves when we read through our essays and ask ourselves, have we written a comparative paragraph, or have we written a paragraph that has a text response for text A and a text response for text B? Because if you look through your work, and I know that some people write blocked essays, and I'm not here telling you not to do that, but if you go through your entire paragraph and the only comparative term that you have in there is the word similarly, and that exists, halfway between what you've said about the first text and the second text, you haven't compared. If I get to the end of your essay and all I can see from you in terms of your comparison is that you've said the word similarly 3 times, all you've said to me is that these texts are the same, and that is not a deep comparison. So how do we go about fixing this? We can aim to talk about the texts together. It doesn't mean that all of your paragraphs need to be perfectly weaved together and done in this ultra complicated way. It means that we need to have sentences that are getting directly to comparison. It also means that we need to be saying more than just, the texts are the same. So you need to start thinking about where they differ. Not just where they differ in what they're saying, how the message might differ, or how they might be saying it slightly differently, or how they might look at the same idea with slight different edges, but also how they've said it differently. Maybe it was done through film techniques and editing in one of your texts, and maybe it was done through the way that the novel was structured or the memoir was structured in the other way. And we can use that as part of our understanding of the text in order to show that they are different in the way that they do this. So often, and if you've watched the comparative videos that I've got here on the channel, you'll understand that I think the best approach for me personally when I'm writing these pieces is to start with where they are the same, but then start to analyse where they start to diverge. Where do they start to differ? What is the key idea and the concept that they share? But then slowly, what do they say that's a little bit different about that? And so if you take a look at my other videos there, I'll give you some of those ideas that they share, and I'll help you out with that further, because the students that have success with this task are the ones that see it as a pairing of texts that explore shared ideas, that have a understanding of the concepts that exist that are shared between the two texts. Not the student that has said, okay, I understand that there's an idea here and this text says something and so does this one, and I'm going to put those two things together. You've got to be looking at them as a pairing, and you've got to be making statements and comparisons that are direct and clear and showing that you can compare the texts as a pairing and not just talk about them at the same time. And so lastly, our section C. Really important here that we're getting through to analysis of language. And I know that sounds really simple, and analysis of argument now too, of course. But so many students misunderstand that to show that they have this understanding of all of the different arguments. And so one of the hallmarks of these lower scoring pieces, or the pieces that aren't going as far as perhaps the student is capable of, is where they're saying things like firstly, and then the writer. The writer continues on to, then Johnson says this. Because what you're showing me if you're writing like that is that you're showing an understanding of, I understood all of the different arguments, but you're not getting to the things that have been done by the writer to the audience. Remember that at its core, it's not a simple thing to do. It's not a simple exercise, but it is quite straightforward in nature. You need to show an understanding of language and argument and how that has influenced the audience that it has been written for. And so often students can show an understanding of the arguments that have been used, and they can then show an understanding of the contention that it might be getting to. But they're so limited in their how far they're rewarded for this because they're not showing the different ways and the different impacts that language and argument have had upon that audience in order to get to that contention. And that's what it's all about. Your teacher or your school or the assessor's report may have shown you certain ways of thinking about this, like think, act, feel, or think, act, do, and all these types of things. And that should always be in the back of your mind. Your analysis should always be coming back to the different emotions, the different thoughts, the different actions, the different things that are being done to that audience. Because if you can get to the end of your argument analysis and you can show that the writer did this to the audience in the first paragraph, that the writer did this that was differently, but then moved to this, and then the tone shifted to this, which brought out a different emotion or a different thought, which would bring out a different outcome, that's when we know we've had success. If instead you're just saying the writer did this, then the writer did this, then the writer did this, and that's what they said, you're not really getting down to those core essentials. So to sum up, and the really important thing that I want you to do here is to get out a highlighter. And I want you to go through the last piece that you wrote for section A. And I want you to highlight every sentence where you are really responding to that question. Then I want you to highlight every sentence where you are directly talking about the author's message or values. Then I want you to highlight every sentence where you've talked about the construction of the text. And I want you to see how much of your paragraph is highlighted. If you're finding long passages where you are just retelling me the events of the novel, you know that you've got something to work on. Section B, you might get a real shock here. I want you to take a look through your paragraphs and I want you to highlight every sentence where you are making a comparison. Now, it would be impossible to highlight every paragraph, every sentence, and I'm not saying that you should. In order to be able to compare, we need to first bring up the evidence from either text, and I completely understand that. However, some of you might get quite a shock in realizing how long you spend on bringing up evidence and bringing up all of these things, and how little time and space you spend on actually comparing. And the reason that I'm talking about a highlighter is that it gives you that visual feedback of you being able to look at it and say, okay, what I'm being assessed on is my ability to compare, and across 3 paragraphs, I've given maybe 2 sentences of it. It's not enough. And so that's something you can sort out. Lastly, with section C, get out your highlighter and show me anywhere where you have talked about how the language or the argument has led the reader to think or act or feel. Also highlight any verbs you've used where you're talking about what the writer has done to the reader in terms of perhaps challenging them or confronting them or questioning them or those types of things, because that's a direct analysis of what the writer's done because you're using a doing word in a verb. Again, you might be really surprised as to how long it takes you to set up analysis and then how little time you actually spend on it. Some students, when they've done this with me before, have found that they've spent 3/4 of the page setting up an understanding of this is what the writer did, and then giving all these quotes and talking about all of these things that the writer did. And then when it came time for that impact, which is essentially what all of this task is about, that impact, that think, act, feel, they wrote something like, this will lead the reader to feel guilty. And then they stopped. That point there where you're getting to the analysis, that's what the task is all about. Make sure that you've got that think, act, feel for every argument or every quote you've brought up. Another thing that you can do here that's a little bit different is to take a look at those quotes and ask yourself, when I brought up a quote or a set of 2 quotes or anything like that, did I analyse why that quote has been included? That might be a real eye-opener for you as well, because what on earth is the point of bringing up a quote and showing that you understood something from the material if you haven't analysed why that was used? And many times students can realise that they're spending a lot of time explaining the article back to the assessor, which of course you don't need to do. And you should be taking that understanding across all 3 areas of study. You do not need to explain the material to the assessor. The assessor has read it, they've looked at the visual, they've done all of those things many times with Section C. They've read your comparative text, they've read your Section A text. If you are spending time explaining the text to them, you are wasting time. Rather, you should be taking on the attitude that you are an expert on this text, because you are, you've worked hard on it. That the assessor is an expert on this text because they are, and that you are there to briefly refer to small things that happen within that text so that you can get to that essential content. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Put your comments and your questions down below. You'll notice on all of our other videos that we take great pride in any student that has asked a really good, genuine question. We want to get back to that student as quickly as possible. So please make sure that you can help us continue that on with this video. And from wherever you're watching, all the best for the upcoming exam. Please make sure that you stick to this essential content. Please make sure that you keep working hard on these things and that you ask questions there. And until we see you next time, all the best and good luck.